So starting with the first one, organismal ecology. The first slide we are going to show is that adaptation is the evolution through natural selection. So let's imagine that we have two plants. They are growing in an environment that is prone to drought. One plant is better than the other in withstanding the drought. Why? Because it has some genes that allows it to withstand that drought. So you can imagine that this plant will have higher survival ability in the drought, and this higher survival ability will give it an advantage over the other plant in terms of reproduction. So at the end, this plant will going to be selected, and it will be able to pass its gene to the next generation. So as you can see, this plant is more adapted to this environment, and evolution will select this plant through natural selection. So we are going to show many slides to highlight how the different organisms are adapted to their environment. And as we mentioned, we are studying now organismal ecology. We are focusing on studying specific organisms, how they are morphologically and physiologically and behaviorally adapted to their environments. So for example, this black-tailed jackrabbit is characterized by these huge ears, and one reason is that it lives in the desert, and it helps the body to decrease its temperature, so it keeps the rabbit cool in the hot weather of the desert. Another example, as we said, organismal ecology explores how morphological and physiological and behavioral adaptations allow the individual to survive and reproduce. So here we are focusing on morphological adaptations. We have two examples. The first one is the mole. So what we can see, it is characterized by these huge claws. Why? Because it lives it lives in the soil, and these huge claws help the mole to dig down in the soil, so under the ground. It is also characterized by having tiny eyes covered by furred eyelids. So as we said, the organism lives under the ground, so the organism doesn't need fully developed eyes. That will be a kind of waste of resources to have these eyes while living down in the dark of the underground. So they have like tiny eyes that can differentiate between dark and light, but they are not very developed like our eyes. Moving to another example, we have the maple winged seed, and the structure of these seeds will help their dispersal. So again, one morphological adaptation in this example. The next example highlights the physiological adaptations, and we have two examples here to show. The first one is the mangrove. So mangroves usually lives in high salt environments, so ponds with high salts. So in addition to having these roots which help fixing the mangrove, especially in tides. Number two, because of the high salt environment, so the leaves of the mangrove, they have specialized glands that allow them to secrete the excess salts out of the leaves. The second example we are going to see is for the water seals, because as you know, they live in a very extreme cold weather in Antarctica, and they are able to dive like 600 meters under the water level. So how they manage to do that, we will see many physiological adaptations. It is all connected with having the maximum amount of oxygen. So they have higher percentage of blood than us human. Number two, they have higher percentage of hemoglobin. They have higher percentage of hematocrit. So it's all about having higher capacity to fill their blood and their lungs with oxygen in order to dive that deep. In addition of that, the equivalent of hemoglobin, which is called myoglobin, so this equivalent is found in muscles. And as we can see, the different types of muscles, as more as the muscle goes darker like that, it contains more of myoglobin, and it reflects the ability of the muscle to do more work, like workload. So we can see the waddle seal is very dark, so it has higher percentage of myoglobin. All these adaptations help the waddle seal to dive deep in the water, help with the high amount of oxygen in their blood, and help with high content of myoglobin in their muscles. The next example, we have already covered this example before, the difference in the GIT structure in the carnivores and the herbivores. So the herbivores, because they eat a lot of starch and cellulosic containing materials, so because the cellulose is difficult to digest, and because of that they have long digestive system, especially in the cecum and in the colon. And as we know, the cecum is the area that harbors the bacteria that will ferment the cellulosic or the plant material. So because of that, they have these two long areas in their digestive system compared to the carnivore. So it's again a type of physiological adaptations. Moving on to the third type of adaptation that we may see in organisms. So now we have behavior adaptation. So we can see this in the pica. So usually the pica is diurnal organism, meaning that it is active during the day. So we can see this kind of behavior character in this pica that lives in the mountain. So at very high altitude, they are diurnal, they are active during the day, and that's okay because up there in the mountain the weather is cool enough, because the resting body temperature of the pica is very close to the leather body temperature. So that's fine at the very high temperature. At the very high elevation or the altitude of the mountains. When we move on to another population of the pica that lives down there at the level of the land, not at the mountain, so there the temperature is really high. They cannot go out during the day because, as we said, their body temperature, resting body temperature is very high, and it is very close to the leather body temperature. So this population will actually change their behavior. So now they are more active at dusk and dawn, and as you can see, this behavior adaptation is allowing them to survive and reproduce. Another example is for the pitcher plant. So they have changed their morphology. Yes, you can argue that this is a morphological change, which is correct, but in addition to that, they have also changed their behavior. So instead of depending on the soil to provide their nutrients, they are now prey capturing plants. So behavior change in addition to morphological change. So again, all these examples highlight different types of adaptation that the organisms will take in order to survive and reproduce. And as you can see, adaptation is evolution through natural selection.